Hey, what is going on, guys? In this video today, we're going to be going over a little debate that I know many controller Fortnite players struggle with, using a regular controller regular grip versus playing claw versus using a controller with paddles. And I know this is something that a lot of people struggle with because I see comments about it all the time. Should I try to learn to play claw? Should I purchase a scuf or just change my binds on a regular controller? Are paddles really worth the extra money they cost? Tons of questions like that. And obviously, a lot of it just comes down to personal opinion and how much you care about Fortnite or just shooter video games in general, but I feel like I have a pretty good amount of knowledge on the topic, so I'll be sharing my thoughts in this video. So without further ado, let's get right into it. But before we get into it, this video today is sponsored by Advance Club. When it comes to Fortnite tips and tricks websites, Advance Club is simply the best in the business. It's designed for every player, no matter your skill level, and it gives you a chance to get tips directly from the best and smartest players in the world, including Bizzle, Booga, Mr. Savage, and Speedy Gonzalez. I've watched a few of the many different courses that they offer, and I'm just consistently blown away by how quality the videos are. So if that sounds interesting, or if you're trying to become a better Fortnite player, especially in competitive, I'd highly recommend checking Advance Club out, and there'll be a link to the website down in the description below. Alright, so let's start this off by quickly going over the positives and the negatives of all three options. So for playing with a regular controller with no claw or paddles, there are two main positives. The first one is simplicity. Odds are if you've played video games for anything more than like a week, you know how to use a regular controller and you're also comfortable with it. If you were to choose to play claw or get a controller with paddles on the other hand, there would actually be a pretty significant learning curve there. On average, I've heard it takes about 1 to 2 weeks of playing for multiple hours a day to start to feel really comfortable with paddles, and for claw, I've heard it's even longer, more like 2 to 3 weeks depending on the type of claw that you're playing. If you're thinking long term, a couple weeks of adjustment probably doesn't sound like a huge deal, but in reality, it's a super frustrating and annoying process that almost makes video games unfun as you're getting used to it. And then the other positive of using a regular controller, regular grip is cost. You don't have to worry about buying any kind of fancy controller or exterior attachment. Even though regular controllers are honestly pretty overpriced as it is, it's still a lot cheaper than the alternatives. However, the obvious negative is that using a regular controller with regular grip simply puts you at a disadvantage compared to the other two options. Those players will be able to jump and press any button mostly without ever taking their fingers off the left or right thumbstick, and since that controls your movement and your aim, taking your fingers off those buttons for even a split second really hurts you. For a controller with paddles on the other hand, the positives and negatives are basically flipped. As long as you use at least one paddle for jump, you should almost never need to take your finger off either thumbstick, plus the more paddles you use, the more optimized your button pressing is going to be. I've always used one paddle personally, mostly because I just hate change to be honest, but it seems like now a lot of the top controller players are using 4 paddles, which makes it so that their fingers are barely ever moving around on the controller, and that's generally a really good thing. But then the obvious negative here is going to be the cost. Yes, there are some cheaper alternatives like the PS4 back button attachment or strike pack, but most people choose to opt for either a scuf or Xbox Elite controller. And like I've said before on this channel, those controllers are borderline scams in my opinion. The initial cost of like $150 I guess isn't the worst thing in the world when a base controller is like $50 to $60, but the problem is these controllers just break way too easily. Sure, some people get lucky and can go 2 or 3 years without having any problems, but for every person like that, there's someone else who buys these controllers and they start to break every 5 or 6 months or so. And it's not like they don't break if you take good care of them either. The most common problems are major stick drift and buttons not responding, and those are things that occur just by playing the game regularly, so they're almost impossible to avoid. The final option is probably the most interesting one as a whole, using a regular controller but playing claw grip. So this one kind of gives you the best of both worlds in theory. You get the positive of not having to buy super expensive premium controllers or premium controller attachments, and then you also get the positive of having access to every button on the controller without ever taking your thumbs off the thumbsticks. Plus, claw transfers pretty well to every video game you'll ever play, arguably even better than using a controller with paddles would. Now there's two main negatives to claw as well. It's not a perfect solution by any means. One is a lot more obvious and the other one's a bit more theoretical. The obvious one is what I touched on in the regular controller section. It's going to take you a lot of time to adjust to claw. If you've been playing video games for a while, you've established an absolute ton of muscle memory holding your controller one way and using certain fingers to hit certain buttons. Claw basically takes all that muscle memory and just throws it in the garbage. So it's a really big adjustment that's going to take a ton of commitment and just willpower in general. I've even heard some negative stories about players who actually fully learned claw, but then they said it took them like another full month to get their aim back to normal. Even though you still use your same thumbs to aim with, since you position your other fingers differently with claw, since aim is so precise, I could see how something small like that could actually end up throwing it off. The other potential negative of claw, and I say potential because it's really more of a rumor than anything, is that playing claw could have long-term negative effects on your fingers and hands. Like I said, I really think this is like an urban legend more than anything else, and I don't think there's any real science to back it up, but I can definitely see the logic behind it to some degree. When you play claw, you sort of bend your fingers in a somewhat unnatural way, so I guess it isn't the craziest thought that it could have some negative effects on your fingers or joints in your hand. So now that we've laid out the positives and negatives of all three options, it's really important for you to understand your situation and what you're trying to achieve when playing Fortnite or any other game. If you're someone who grinds Fortnite, you play multiple hours a day, and your goal is to be, say, a top competitive player, you're really putting yourself at a pretty significant disadvantage if you aren't playing claw or using paddles. On the flip side, if you're someone who maybe plays more casually, and as long as you're at least average, you're fine because you just want to play for fun with your friends, well then it may not be worth it to spend a month learning claw or spending hundreds of dollars to get paddles. And like I alluded to earlier, it's important to understand that your options aren't limited to just regular controller, regular grip versus claw versus paddles. Something I've recommended before is to try something like a strike pack or PS4 back button attachment, and that ends up giving you paddles for cheaper. So if you absolutely hate it and can't get used to them, you only wasted like $30 or $40 instead of $200. And let's say you're a regular controller who really cares about the game, but at the same time you don't want to play claw and you can't afford paddles, you could always optimize your bind so that you jump with the left or right thumbstick, aka R1/L1. This definitely isn't as good of an option as paddles or claw, but it at least makes it so that you don't take your finger off the thumbstick while jumping, so you can jump and aim at the same time. So definitely a lot of things to consider here, and at the end of the day, there's no clear best or worst option because it totally varies on a player-to-player basis. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you watched the entire thing, be sure to let me know with a comment down in the comment section below. Let me know whether you currently use a regular controller with regular grip, a controller with paddles, or if you play claw. Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications, do whatever the heck you want, and I will catch you guys next time.